Hello and welcome to a new series of interviews from Dinis Guarda's Cities ABC Open Business Council. And today I want to welcome Michael Beck, that is behind the new DeFi FinTech project Union. So Michael is a business strategist and technologist with over 20 years of experience in the areas of healthcare, finance, and wealth management. And during his time, he took on multiple roles and has been a founder, principal consultant, and chief technology officer. He has been served as an AVP at a prominent capital management company, where he performed software architecture and developing functions for an hedge fund with 14 billions in asset management, which is quite impressive. And Michael has an BA in economics, political science from Columbia College of Columbia University, and an MBA from the Columbia Business School. And he holds 5 patents in the areas related to decentralized cryptography with respect to management of data rights and entitlements. And Union is a very interesting company that is focused on building bundle protection and liquid secondary market with a multi-token model. So we'll go through that during the interview. Welcome to our series, Michael. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
So I'll go straight away to the point. So you have a quite impressive background that comprehends both technology, finance, decentralized systems, and centralized systems, and as well patents, and a very strong as well academic background in one of the leading universities worldwide. So can you tell us a bit about yourself from the background, education, and how did you come up to create and lead Union?
Well, there's a lot there that brought me along the way. I was an early user of computers. Actually, I used to play a lot in Atari video games and go online on bulletin board systems. So much to the point that when I was considering to go to university, my parents said, "You're not going to study computer science because we already take your computer away from you too much already." So I finished my major and had a number of points left over and still managed to study computer science at university. But when it came time to graduate, the question was, what would I be doing now? And I found myself naturally in the middle of the first dot-com bubble. And I was very much attracted to the promise of, what information and information systems could do, to the modernization and development of economies. Having studied monetary policy and trade, I was very much interested in strategic information systems and the way that they could be used, to help in coordination among multiple people who typically couldn't communicate easily among each other. And I think that background generally, attracted me to notions of decentralization and self-sovereign entitlement, as I've gone through my career. I guess following some initial work I did, I found myself in healthcare, and very early on, healthcare is always, especially in the United States, it's focused around, whose right is it to be able to access what information, when and where. And that led me to think a lot about management of entitlements in decentralized form. So, for instance, the doctor may hold your record, but really you're the one who owns your record, and you want that record to be available anytime that record's necessary, except for when you don't want it accessed, which is really useful unless, of course, you're brought to the hospital and you're not able to respond to a person's question of whether or not they're allowed to see what you need. So it's very interesting, in terms of, at least in the healthcare space, there's always a trade-off between privacy and availability of data, and then also security and, or let's say privacy and I would say privacy and service, and then security and availability of data. There's always a trade-off, yeah? And I became very fascinated about this, and that's actually what brought me very strongly into decentralized cryptography and rights management security, thinking about ways that different actors could be able to access content in a way that was respectful of the context in which that content was being accessed, and also the intention and the needs of the people who were trying to understand, how to provide service. From healthcare, I found myself actually touching finance, because as healthcare data facts became very small, and with things like biostatistics and the need for quantified self and smart devices that are tracking heartbeats and other information. healthcare became small data with very high volatility. Finance, on the other hand, went from stock ticks to larger facts, as finance transitioned into compliance regimes. And a lot of my experience in healthcare, dealing with large data facts and management of security around large data facts, actually made me attractive from the perspective of being able to work with financial institutions. So I found myself into a large investment bank. I worked on portfolio accounting architecture at that bank, and then ultimately found myself into the fund space, where I was always interested in finding ways to, work with large data facts, as quickly and rapidly as possible to be able to provide service, to customers, with low latency. So, that's pretty much my background, from a traditional financial technology perspective and healthcare technology perspective. And the work that, that brought me to blockchain really came from someone, tapping me on the shoulder and saying, all this stuff looks really interesting, Michael. It looks like you have a background in decentralized systems. It looks like you spent some time in finance. Should we invest in this stuff? What does this stuff really mean? And that really brought me very deeply, close to the cryptocurrency community and the blockchain community, trying to understand, the core of the technologies, the differences between different chains, layer one architectures. And, my fascination with the space kind of grew from there. So that's a lot of the history of how I, got to, my background traditionally, then also my transition over to, blockchain and cryptocurrency. I think that the work that that attracted me to decentralized finance is, of course, looking at DeFi, as a primary use case, and one of the larger, I think, a fulfillment of one of the larger promises of blockchain and cryptocurrency. And looking at it and realizing that it's expensive, it's difficult to use, and it's pretty risky for the average person to be able to expose themselves to. And I wanted to work, to try to find an efficient way, an effective way to provide safety, and reduce cost for parties, who aren't necessarily, very financially sophisticated, who aren't necessarily, who don't necessarily have a lot of money to lose, to be able to participate in, a self-sovereign system, of being able to exchange, and create value. So that's that was the background from which Union has grown, as we look at protection products. In the form of various insurance structures as mechanisms for being able to reduce costs and decrease risk.
Amazing. So you made an entire roadmap over there. That's great. So I want to go back to your career. So in terms of your academic background, so can you tell us a bit, because I'm particularly interested on the personality, and then I'll go more to Union. I have a lot of questions, so let's go step by step. So in terms of your master in Columbia, so what did you study? Because I'm particularly interested from your background in economics and political science to your MBA, but as well your patents in cryptography, which you have 5. Yeah.
Sure. So my major is, I guess, in the UK you would call the PPE background, politics, philosophy, and economics, is the major equivalent of what I studied in the US. The focus that I took was an international political science major with a American government subfield, and I focused very strongly in international political economy and also monetary theory and trade, especially as they relate to economic development and growth. So that was very much fascinating to me, to look at various theories, and what actually made countries successful, what made people successful, and how you take, a microeconomic view and grow into a macroeconomic view whereby you can understand and, perhaps even predict, outcomes, in the development of nations. So I thought that was very interesting, to study. And as I like to say, it doesn't necessarily matter what you study. It's really a frame, what you're studying at least the bachelor's level, gives you a framing for how you think, how you speak, how you write, and how you read. And, with a good book, you can learn something else. So that's that's the approach I took to it. I had a number of fascinating classmates, and I think a number of them went off to law school and banking. Me, on the other hand, I was always interested in playing with technology. So, still in touch with them today, made a number of great friends, And I can say that, I still have a strong affinity to the university.
Amazing. So, and in terms of your patents, because patents in cryptography is quite an achievement, and I think it's an area that touches blockchain, touches security, like you mentioned, in a lot of different areas. So I would like to hear about that and your background on that.
Sure. So the work there was specifically grew out of this dynamic I had mentioned before in healthcare, where you have a patient who wants to be able to control their record, an information custodian, who is not that patient, who has ownership or control over that record, and the need for a third party who may or may not be known to the patient to have that information disclosed. So that was always the problem that was trying to be solved, from a healthcare perspective, coming from a healthcare systems background. And that problem generalizes into a number of different things. I mean, rights management technology has been around for well over 20 years today. You see it in controlling music on iTunes. You see it in protecting video on Netflix. There are a lot of different mechanisms, even today, to protect PDFs. But at the time, when we were looking at the space back in 2005, of course, a lot of these technologies required the publisher of the information to be the custodian of the information, to also be the rights manager of the information, and an entity receiving the data to be known, and the device on which that data was to be used to be known at the time that the information was being encrypted. And in a decentralized environment, none of those parameters hold. As I say in healthcare, the patient may be the rights manager, the health insurance company or the health information exchange may be the custodian of the data. The physician may be the person who's requesting the data, but you don't necessarily know who the physician is or what device, and maybe it's not even the physician, but maybe their assistant or someone else in their staff that requires actual exposure to a certain bit of information that may not even be anticipated by the patient when the data is initially permissioned. So we were trying to deal with that problem specifically, and we did that through a set of public key cryptography parameters and based utilities that allowed for the late binding of terms and conditions to data that was received by an interested party. So instead of encrypting a lot of the context-driven and the role-driven parameters into the access of the data, what we were doing is we were allowing those things to be added to the data as the data was being requested. So that's
Amazing.
that's what we were doing back in 2005. And then, of course, thinking about the dynamic of, social distance and the necessity for parties who were related to each other to be treated similarly, even if they're not necessarily known to the patient, we began to think about relationship-based authorization into these rights managed spaces. So, for instance, people like you or people like me may like to share certain information in certain contexts, but not in others. For instance, I would want, every physician where I am today, within a certain, radius of my current location to be able to access critical health information about me. But when I leave this location, I don't want them to have any of that residue. I'd actually prefer that, I'd prefer to have that data available to the people within a certain radius of where my next location is. I don't know any of those people, but at the same time, if I'm ever in an accident or injured, I want them to be able to have access to that information. So we started thinking about, relationships as well as geospatial, considerations, from a self-sovereign perspective, and how parties should be able to access that data. So that's where a lot of the intellectual property around, our work in decentralization has come from. And I would say, we've even looked at the way to use centralized control over decentralized data and decentralized entitlements as a mechanism to power distribution of data on blockchains. Although I don't necessarily think that work will ever find itself into the Union platform. So that's it's always been
I
an interest.
understand the background. Yeah, so in terms of let's go right now to Union. So from this work, you touch a bit about the inception of Union, but can you tell us how did it start at least a bit more, and what are you presently doing? So just I think picking some notes that you have both in your website and different things. So Union is a technology platform that combines bundle protection and the liquid secondary market with a multi-token model, and as well as the DeFi platform that looks at managed multi-layer risks across smart contracts and protocols. So can you tell this I think for me and for everyone listening to us, especially as well for people that don't know so much about DeFi, contextualizing the work that you're trying to do, and this work in terms of bridging the protocols of smart contracts and creating a multi-token model that can actually facilitate these possibilities?
So I think that when we think about DeFi, the nice thing about DeFi is it's decentralized. The challenge with anything that's decentralized is the need to build a reputation around things for people to feel comfortable to use it. So you have a lot of people, for instance, who are very willing to use smart contracts on a decentralized ledger to either store or exchange value. And you have some people who are new to it, who are a little more timid, who are willing to work in smaller amounts, but not necessarily at the level of, for instance, whales in the cryptocurrency space, who are actually able to see the broad-based returns through working in these platforms. Our view of this is, ultimately, blockchains and cryptocurrencies more successful as more people are able to access and take advantage of them. So when we started thinking about what we wanted to achieve in the DeFi space, we said, well, why don't we make this safer? Why don't we make this less risky, less expensive, and easier to consider? But the thing that we like about DeFi, and part of the reason why I think we drifted away from thinking about layer 2 solutions or trying to build side chains, is we wanted to maintain the composability of a very robust ecosystem. There are many different, if you could think about DeFi as a forest, every smart contract is a tree, and you can run from tree to tree, trying to create your own returns. You stake in one place, you get something, that represents that stake. You move it to someplace else, you're able to, get yield from that. You're able to, take the yield, you're able to convert that yield into something else of value. So there are many different paths through this forest. And, we started to think about, well, what are the paths that are most predictable? What are the risks in going along certain paths? And that's really, where we started to think about, some of the challenges around, well, what happens when it costs more to get out of the path than you originally expected? Or what happens when you have to tie up more collateral because of the volatility of what you used in order to stake to borrow? What exactly is the implication for the traversal of those paths? So what Union tries to do, and I think our first product focus is around collateral optimization as an example. And I'll use a concrete example here. Is collateral optimization is really focused on the idea that when people want to borrow in DeFi, typically they have to take a currency like Ethereum and stake that Ethereum at a value of greater than 100% of what they're borrowing to cover for the volatility of what they're borrowing, for the volatility of the Ether, while they are going to go and take a stable coin to do something else. So our view is, there's a time value of money associated with locking up, 150% of what you're borrowing. And while it provides great assurance that in the case of liquidation, people who are lending are able to take, get their value back, it doesn't necessarily do anything for the borrower to be, borrowing with collateral greater than the value of what they have in hand. So we look at the difference and we say, well, if we could use, the value of protection or insurance, can we actually then say someone might be able to borrow at 100% of what they need, with collateral, or can they borrow below, the value of what they're borrowing? If we're able to find people who are willing to help take the risk associated with the volatility of that currency that they're staking as collateral, and that's really the focus of our first product in the space. I think that, as we've talked to people about that it's been fairly well received. We've written a couple articles, about, the theory of how we do this. And, we really look at ourselves as providing a mechanism by which not only are we able to offer a protection token, that represents the reduction of the need for collateral in that context. But now what we're doing is we're creating benefit pools, whereby that protection token is able to draw value in the event that there's an event for which that protection is necessary. And those pools make themselves attractive at a broad scale for people who want to find diversification inside of DeFi for specific flows of payment. So if you can imagine, for instance, collateral risk really, comes down to, well, is the smart contract safe? And if the smart contract isn't safe, is the protocol itself safe?
So as someone that has been between centralized finance and now decentralized finance, and as both an academic background, but as well been working in the hedge funds and with big financial organizations, and as well with the bridge in a lot of different areas of finance. How do you see the opportunities and as well the challenge of DeFi? Because you mentioned a lot of things that, for instance, right now, like in any new technology, the important thing is to scale, but it's as well to protect the data. Because let's say in a DeFi system, and one of the biggest challenges is that, of course, the smart contracts, and you are an expert in cryptography, the smart contracts have to be managed by a governance team that, first of all, codes the contracts. But if there's some problem, someone has to follow up on that. So how do you see that part, especially being an expert in cryptography and blockchain, but as well with background in finance?
Well, I think that, the nice thing about DeFi and the nice thing about blockchain and cryptocurrency generally is it's allowed for a lot of applied innovation based off of cryptographic research. If you think about the world of centralized security or other applications of cryptography, a lot of these things have kind of found their way into the enterprise realm. And there's not a lot of innovation in the enterprise realm unless it's driven by customer understanding. Whereas, with each one of these cryptocurrency projects that we come across, or blockchain projects that we come across, there's always an opportunity for something new to pop up, whether it be zero knowledge proofs, or non-interactive zero knowledge proofs, or key sharding, or, multi-party computation. A lot of these things actually grow in, these blockchain and cryptocurrency projects first now before I think they ever hit commercial application, or they may exist in commercial research labs, but unless they find contact with the customer, they never find their way into a product. So I think a lot of innovation happens in the blockchain and cryptocurrency space. The challenge is that when you live on the bleeding edge of innovation, sometimes you get cut. And, you find a lot of people wanting to try things, not necessarily understanding the historical context of things that have been tried before, or providing safety and parameters, because they aggressively want to be able to launch their code, and get the notoriety that comes from success. So we look at this as, it's a very fervent hotbed, for innovation. And at the same time, you have to be able to have some form of, as a consumer, have some form of safety, and some notion of reputation associated with what contracts you're using. In a lot of cases, people look at institutional filters. What companies have purchased these tokens, or what companies have backed these tokens, or what are the backgrounds of the founders, or how many lines of commit, or how many how diffused or the wallets, or how robust is the GitHub repository. I mean, we all look for these indicators to be able to tell whether a project is good or not. But there's no necessary, even if you think a project is good, and even if people have followed, to the letter, strong security, principles, and strong development operations, and being able to mature their code and make sure that their code is documented. There's now with DeFi, because I can put multiple smart contracts together that never had, any interrelatability to each other and, development or testing. As a user, there are always these unintended consequences of composability. So I always, you will find, for instance, someone will take a flash loan and expose another, create exposure inside of a smart contract that was never considering the fact that it may be exposed to a flash loan. Those types of things are things that a team, even a reasonable team, can't necessarily always test for, but has to consider. So I think that, we're going to see a lot of people think more about, the reputation of teams and contracts in space. And at the same time, I think that there's going to be a broader interest in the influence and implications of composability. And I think that what that does is it leads to two things. First is, just like we have in traditional finance, we have centralization of reputation around certain banks. And I think you find that in DeFi, that certain smart contracts, certain protocols become more and more popular as a result of their reputation for being able to hold a lot of capital. So that's one thing. And I think what ends up happening also on the other side is certain pathways through DeFi, as I mentioned, thinking about DeFi as a forest where you can run from tree to tree, certain paths through the forest are going to be considered safer than others. And the safer paths will be worthy of either insurance or protection for the people who want to run that way, making these things easier for those people to do, because the paths become well worn and more aware for the parties who are participating. Now, of course, what that will do is possibly reduce returns along those paths. So certain activities will not be rewarded as greatly as they are today. but they'll still be able to provide, you know, some form of safety and commerce for the people who want to be able to participate in decentralized finance. But you'll also now have this tendency of, you know, again, a strong centralization of reputation, strong centralization of interest, you know, of, you know, the decentralized community and protocols where they feel safest. And I think that that's what we're going to be looking at.
And for instance, one of the questions I have been working in technology, but as well speaking with a lot of industry experts, is the challenge of making a bridge between, first of all, technology makers like you, but as well the players, because like you mentioned, the challenge, and that's the problem that happens with crypto, that we are actually having a paradox, is that the crypto technology is decentralized, but most of the ownership is highly centralized. There was recently a study that most of the crypto in the world, I think the numbers are a bit scary, but it's like just, I will just go through the numbers because I want your opinion on this. But I think the challenge that I have is, okay, are we going to build that when, first of all, the crypto industry, so for instance, I think is, the numbers are here. So from the numbers, at least that I got access, so 30% of BTC is controlled by 2,225 Bitcoin accounts. So of course in Ethereum, or at least in DeFi, which is mostly using Ethereum protocol, is even more centralized in a lot of ways, because in the last year alone, the DeFi industry went from almost nothing to $29 billion, which is already quite impressive. And of course, the challenge that we have, okay, the technology is highly decentralized. And of course, from a technology, and you are as a cryptographer, I know that you know how to do it, because in the end of the day, the machines will do whatever we tell it. But how do you kind of bridge the human governance issue, and as well all these different areas that there are, especially coming from greediness that we have from history of humanity, unfortunately, but as well try to do that in a governance model that actually can improve governance around data, around the technology, and around the finance transactions?
It's a big question to ask.
Yeah, I know.
But thank you for it.
But it's your business and it's our business. In the end of the day, I think we only will be succeeding if you answer this question right, at least from a detail of the software development. I understand that you can answer not answer from a regulatory, or at least even from a humanity perspective.
Well, let me say it like this. I think that anyone who spends some time in the blockchain and cryptocurrency space knows that it's always easier to fork a project and build consensus to improve it. It's always easy to take someone's idea that's in the public repository, change it a little bit, and get us to where we are now, which is pretty much how we've gotten to where we are now. You know, everything starting from Bitcoin, you know, and then altcoins that were forked from Bitcoin, and then ultimately, you know, Ethereum, you know, where you have, you know, more of a Turing complete view of the world, you know, of execution on chain. I mean, everything has been built on everything else. They all stand off of each other, and each project has come with purpose along the way. And with that purpose comes community. And I think that, you know, when you see whales, you know, existing in any cryptocurrency, it's mainly because these are people who decided to participate early and they saw value in what that ledger or what that community represented. I don't necessarily think that there's something wrong with having strong stakeholders.
Yeah.
You know, strong stakeholders, you know, if you think about the expense associated with mining Bitcoin, you know, over time, you know, what if you think about it, proof of work ultimately does become proof of stake, because as things become more and more expensive, the only parties who have incentive to validate the ledger are parties who have the most on the ledger to lose if it's validated incorrectly, regardless of cost. So,
That's true.
so I think that, you know, these large cryptocurrency holders are actually the anchors of, you know, of the ecosystem that we're performing in. You know, they help validate, you know, through their experiences, what should be or what shouldn't be directions that we take. And that's not necessarily to say that, you know, they're all kingmakers of projects, yeah. But it's to say that, you know, they provide sanity checks and guardrails, you know, for people who could very easily go into a Git repository like you and me today, you know, fork Bitcoin and say we have our own coin, you know, with thousands of coins on CoinMarketCap, et cetera. You know, you sometimes wonder, well, what's the differentiator? And the differentiator is the ability to create critical mass. So I think that as long as, you know, a token is meeting a specific need of a certain community, the token has value. And the value of that token is, is backed by, the need for it, in whatever application or utility or, currency or exchange where it's being used, together with the principal need to validate the ledger and the expense of doing that. And ultimately, projects will consolidate, and we will find that, through exchange, ultimately projects go out, projects sunset because teams, realize that the currency isn't worth anything, especially teams that work for currency, very quickly realize that, unless they're able to get liquidity and their liquidity has value, they've wasted a lot of time. And this is not necessarily, 2016, 17, 18, but, a lot of the value that's been collected in the past about building cryptocurrencies, from early purchasers or investors in projects has actually gone out to marketing, specifically to be able to get diversification and diffusion and awareness of projects. I think that, as we're living in, the world we are now, those costs are coming down significantly. But even so, you have to be able to pierce through all the messaging now of everyone else who's on the same platforms trying to be heard as they're trying to create their project to change things. We've been very excited about the success of Union early on and the support that we've been able to get. I think we tested our message early with the market, and I think that we found very strong support, and people who've been able to guide us, along the way in making strategic decisions. And we've been very fortunate for that. But it's taken a lot of time in the space to be able to make those connections and get to know those people and float to the level of consideration where, help is something that people will give generously. So, and I think that, again, like we deal with institutional filters in traditional finance and traditional world, I don't necessarily think filters are bad in DeFi or the decentralized world because they help reduce cost for the people who are actually going out there to use these things. So it's...
I like your vision, and I think it's very wise. So one thing, going to practicalities and probably wrap up in one or two questions, but I still want to touch two more questions or three. So what kind of roadmap you've been putting for pushing Union forward in terms of concrete, let's say, case study that you want to highlight? Because in the end of the day, like you mentioned, there's a proof of concept and a proof of stake, or a proof of, in this case, is how you take things forward, especially how you bridge case studies that can actually go a bit more ambitious. I would like to hear a bit about Union.
Well, I think that, when we first launched, our focus was on, trying to build a broad base of holders and liquidity to reduce some of the volatility of the cryptocurrency itself and build some assurance around, the fact that, we were stable and that people who were holding us were safe while we were building and trying to, improve upon our vision and the products. Product definition, is pretty much set around our first product that we hope to introduce this quarter around collateral optimization. And I mentioned a little bit about that earlier in the interview. And that's been our first focus. But we've also been looking more, at ways that the structure of our token can meet the demands of more cyber physical interactions, the demands of insurance in, the real world, as we like to say, or insurance that's typically provided in traditional finance by sourcing liquidity from DeFi. As you said, what is it, $29 billion, involved in DeFi today. All that money in DeFi, it really rises and falls on the price of, ETH and Bitcoin. So when we think about that, everything that's happening in DeFi, is on this crashing wave of cryptocurrency below it. And, we say, well, what if we could actually start to think about things like, traditional insurance, casualty and property, or if we could think about, needs for things as easy as, film completion bonds, which have become incredibly expensive, since COVID. Where anyone on a movie set can halt production, from having infected a group of other people. So we look at the, defects in the physics, I like to say in real life, and say, is there a way to perhaps source liquidity from some of the whales and some of the people participating in traditional finance to help reduce their volatility as well? So create products, for the real world that actually, help people in the cryptocurrency world reduce some of their risk, and some of their volatility by finding exposure that they otherwise wouldn't be able to get unless they converted back into fiat. So that's
Oh,
I think that that's really where our roadmap is headed. But today our focus, our pure focus, is really around the idea of reducing risk and cost inside of the DeFi space, and from collateral optimization to dealing with gas prices, and trying to reduce and cap gas price exposure. I think that those are the two primary places where we see ourselves innovating, and then of course being able to provide simple policies over things like smart contract risk, or holdings risk, for individuals or teams that are looking to provide additional assurance around the work that they perform. So we're looking at ourselves primarily as a DeFi company, but we really think that we have legs to grow beyond that.
amazing. So I wish you all the best on that. So my last question, and then I will ask a bit more of where we can find about the union. But so you have a background that bridges healthcare, finance, and wealth management, which are three key areas of society. And now, of course, with the union, you're creating a lot of solutions that actually can bridge these as your smart contract technology, and then a lot of different things can actually grow. So one of the things that is going to be critical is the identity of our data. And
Mm.
our most precious data is precisely finance, health, and wealth. So the three things together, and wealth can be about rewards, can be about our work, can be about rewarding systems and stuff like that. So how do you see these three areas that are merging more and more? But as well, as you mentioned in the beginning of the call, especially when it comes to healthcare, there's a lot of risks and a lot of challenges, especially for instance, if you are in the US, you have an highly, I would say, fragmented healthcare system that if you don't have money for insurance, you are a bit in trouble.
Yep.
Whereas in Europe, you have a much more protective healthcare system that helps almost everyone, and it works pretty well, to be honest. And then you have all the different, so we have a lot of different complex systems, but then at the same time, you have the likes of actually Silicon Valley that have right now over control of all our data, and we have a lot of things going on from tokenization systems around data and different things. But I would like to see how do you see this area, both from a technology, but as well from a potential solutions on DeFi, because DeFi could actually create not only decentralized finance solutions, but as well decentralized solutions that look at all these three areas, because in the end, increasingly these three areas are related.
Well, they are. I mean, and I think it's an interesting challenge. The truth of the matter is, I think generally people are lazy with respect to there are some people who care about their privacy, but there are a lot of people who will trade their privacy for service and customization. Being referred to a set of movies on Netflix, or being, recommended the next song on iTunes, or the next book on Amazon. Some people look at this as a convenience, the autocomplete in the Google search bar. Um, those things, those things are, useful for the majority of people the majority of time. They don't necessarily think about what happens on the back end and how data is managed and manipulated in order to allow these companies to provide that service. But they look at, the device and the output as being incredibly useful, so they trade their privacy away. Um, from a security perspective, they hope that the data is secure. And I think that, as we've moved to more, cloud-based systems, we've been able to, and we've gotten more scale in the cloud. The security view of the world has been able to find economies of scale to be able to protect data more effectively. So not only has this data been accumulated among certain companies, but those companies have become fortresses for how that data is used. Now, of course, in becoming fortresses, the data doesn't move fluidly between those companies, but our devices now cross-authorize the access and use of this data between those fortresses. What we don't have is access to the way that they monetize independently of us. And of course, if something is free, you're usually the product. So the concern, the concern here, we would say, is how do you get innovation in a place where people are practically lazy with the convenience that they receive, when you want innovation to be around privacy and security. The people who are getting that convenience have to be willing to sacrifice their convenience. And I can say that, for instance, a lot of people, for instance, don't want to manage their healthcare information the same way they manage their checking account. So different types of data have different types of importance in people's lives. And different types of information is better contextually analyzed by people who are more professional than, the people sometimes who the data is about. So you have you have concerns around, the granularity of data. You have concerns about the efficacy, or the application of data in certain context. You have the, concerns around, the maintenance of the data. And, you could even think about their cases where someone who doesn't understand the importance of the data for a certain context could actually freeze access to their data, perhaps in a self-sovereign way, and prevent a process that is actually critical to their survival, maybe the adjudication of a healthcare claim, or maybe, the awareness of a public health official about an oncoming, a pandemic. They could freeze the awareness of an organization that's actually focused on their data for a greater public good. So I think that in order to really get effective, scaling of DeFi around some of these more traditional environments, and to unlock a lot of the value that we found from Web 2.0 and accumulation of content inside of Google, Apple, Facebook, etc. I think we need to start by educating people about how their data is used and what their data represents, and then providing systems that allow them not only to to manipulate their data, but also to understand how people like them typically interact with their data in certain settings, so that they understand the actual costs. I think that there's an optimal view of this. We can have centralized and we can have decentralized. I'd like to say that the view should be you should have the right degree of centralization for what it is that you're trying to achieve. And different people will choose different levels of centralization based off of the level of service they expect.
Yeah, I think very good points. I think I subscribe to all of this, and I think you guys have to write about this, because I think that's the biggest challenge. Is that if I think, like you mentioned, most of people will not take attention to their data. I think everyone, even if they might be careful, and I think, like, for example, you guys in the US proved in the last couple of years that everything that happened around Trump, that actually these people want to be in a lie, even if there's reality around them. I'm not going political. I'm talking pure from a facts part.
Oh yeah.
So that means it's more than just data. Right now it's about even the perception. You don't want to know the perception because you are in a bubble, and the bubble becomes kind of, this is actually it's more political and scientific, or more philosophical, but it's going to be very important as AI and all these areas of data become much more powerful. And you are working on that, so yeah.
Yeah, but that actually goes to exactly what we're talking about here, because people don't want to manage their own information. Now we have AI systems recommending what it is that they should be seeing on the basis of things of their interest, and they find themselves in these bubbles, in these echo chambers, because the incentive is to get someone to click for the content. If you click for the content, the people who provide the content get paid, and the people who refer, or
Yes.
the people who refer you to that content get paid. So there's never any reason to make you deviate outside the thought sphere that you've created for yourself.
Yeah, but yeah, completely, I'm with you. And this is the biggest risk of our civilization, because you can start creating almost a matrix society, because it's very easy, unfortunately. And right now, and actually blockchain can be, unfortunately, very badly used for that. Because if you get the smart contract programmed by someone that has a macabre focus, you might be in serious trouble going forward, especially if you put blockchain and AI together. Well, that's a bigger question.
Yeah, no, but it's exciting because we make choices, right? The technology is neutral. But we have to make choices around these things, and unless we're able to discuss these things and create forums for where we install our values.
Exactly. Yeah, it's about values.
We get unanticipated outcomes. I love when people say, well, people will say, well, the data said that I should do this. But the question is, what do you want to do? Just because the data told you so, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing. And I think that we have more need now than perhaps ever before to apply ethics to applications with data.
Yeah, no, I think this is the biggest challenge of our society, and that's actually one of my focus on this channel. We might do a separate interview just to talk about that, because I think you have great insights. So thank you so much, Michael. I think we could go for 1 hour more or two.
Thank you. Dennis. I appreciate it.
No, but it's great. It's great your insights, and actually, I wish Union all the success. I think what you're trying to do, and as well, especially, I like that you have both the technology, but as well the ideological, and as well the sense of responsibility around technology, because a lot of people are just thinking about creating another way of getting a shortcut to get some speculation on the token. So just where people can find about you and Union, for people listen to us, and as well, I know that you guys are going through funding and a lot of things, just a bit, a bit of an update on that area.
Sure. Well, I mean, again, Dennis, thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I've enjoyed this very much. And I didn't realize how quickly time flies. So, yes, anytime you want another hour, I'm happy to, join you. And it doesn't have to be for video either. The Union Project is founded www.unn.finance. So that's unn.finance is actually the ticker for our token. The project is, we have Medium and Telegram. Great content on Medium. I encourage people to read the Telegram communities. There's one official channel, and then I believe 2 unofficial channels that people can jump in on and understand a little bit more about how our community sees things. So I'm excited to have more people participate, and of course we're watching, and we appreciate the feedback in the community. So excited to have the time with you today, and then of course looking forward to talking more.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's been a privilege, and I think really, I think your project, that's why I wanted to talk to you guys, is very interesting. So I wish you all the luck. I know that it's not easy as well what you're trying to do.
Hey, thank you so much again. Be well.